Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. Welcome to the webinar, Getting the Top to Listen, Building a Business Case. The event is organized by the University of Sheffield International Faculty, City College, and the media Capital and Karrieri. And it is our present to you as part of the communication campaign of the contest for young business leaders, next generation. So if you are young, meaning up to 35 years old, including, inspired and inspirational, if you are active and have results to share, you still have the time to apply in the contest next generation. Or perhaps nominate a young manager or entrepreneur you know that answer these qualities. The deadline is the 27th of May, and the online application and nomination forms could be found at capital.bg/next. The prizes are MBA scholarships provided by the University of Sheffield International Faculty, City College. And today you will have the chance to experience what it is to be a student at the university and, of course, to get some practical advice for free, which could help you become a better professional. My name is Darina Cherkezova. And I'm product manager of the Jobs and Career Development Media Karrieri, and I will be the moderator of today's online event. I'm glad to welcome you and also our speaker, Dr. Lesli Samozi, who is academic director of the MBA program of the University of Sheffield International Faculty, City College. Hi, Mr. Samozi.
Hi there, Darina, and welcome to everybody. Nice to have you with us.
Mr. Samozi is a highly sought-after speaker in the area of organizational change and the management of change. He has a broad academic and practical experience working as a marketing manager and a private consultant for diverse organizations, from the EU to KPMG Management, the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, TELUS, and etc. Today, he will share with you his insights and practical tools on how to effectively communicate with the senior management. We have all faced situations in which we have to present the results of our work or present new concepts and ideas to people who have to make the final evaluation or decisions. And yes, sometimes it is hard to make them listen, to be convincing enough, no matter how good the results are or how brilliant is the idea. And it could be the same when communicating with new clients. They just don't listen what a great product or a service you have. Why? Often the case is connected with the lack of effective communication, with the way we present the business case. And the good news is that Mr. Samozi is here to tell us how to do it the right way. How to make the senior management or the customer buy our ideas, results, products, services, how to effectively communicate, how to be effective in communication, how to engage them, how to make them listen. And with that said, I give the floor to Dr. Samozi.
Great, thank you very much, and a big thank you to everybody who's shown up with us here live. We mentioned right at the beginning in the introduction that this would be something like being at an MBA class, or give you that experience. Well, of course, we'd be doing that at least in our program, in a very live format with you. So we're going to do our best through the webinar, through the technology, to give you some of the senses of some of the things that we do through our program at the University of Sheffield. Let me begin just by telling you a little bit about my background. I've got a PhD in management, specializing in the areas of organizational behavior and human resource management. Since we're in webinar mode, I wanted to at least give you a virtual picture of myself. I've also got a master's in management studies, specializing in international business and marketing. from Carleton University in Ottawa. I am, as was mentioned, the academic director of our MBA program and a senior lecturer here at the International Faculty of the University of Sheffield. I spent 5 years as a marketing manager in biomedicals and in the information technology sector. We were producing products for a very unique niche market, people who were blind and visually impaired. And we used to produce products that would allow them to navigate, but as well to read banknotes. In North America, as a lot of you know, our banknotes are all the same size, and in the US they're all the same color. So we developed a device that would identify through optical character recognition banknotes for that particular segment. And we expanded our product offering into a device which would identify colors for people who were blind or visually impaired. So if somebody was getting, for example, dressed in the morning, they would be able to identify the different colors and through a variety of color spectrums. I've spent now about 20 years consulting and training in the areas of human resource management, but as well marketing and international business, both here throughout Southeastern Europe, as well as in North America. I've been doing some work in Bulgaria as well for companies like MTEL. But as was also mentioned, I've worked for a number of international organizations, including the International Finance Corporation, the European Union, as well as a number of telecom companies throughout the region. Let me just at the outset tell you a little bit about our MBA program. We've been physically delivering our program in Sofia for the last 3 years. 25 years in total, the City College MBA program has been offered. Approximately 2,000 alumni throughout this region. Our program also runs, besides in Sofia, in Yerevan, Kiev, in Thessaloniki. In the past, prior to us being physically located in Sofia, our Bulgarian students used to come and join us in Thessaloniki, as well as in Belgrade, Tbilisi, Bucharest, and this year in Baku. The program itself is accredited by AMBA, the Association of MBAs. Besides doing my academic directorship for the university, as well as teaching in our program, I also do accreditations for AMBA. I go around to different universities throughout the world evaluating their MBA programs. We're also accredited by the AACSB, which is an American affiliation in terms of business programs, and as well the Chartered Management Institute. The philosophy behind our program is based on a holistic view of management and of developing our candidates, both from a personal and professional development point of view through our coaching program, as well as other integrated activities that we do. Applying business knowledge, not only from the regional perspective, but with a global perspective. As many of you know, in today's business environment, it's impossible to only look within your own microcosm of business. And we try to bring that global perspective, not only through the people teaching in our program, but as well through the student body itself. Of course, like a lot of MBA programs, a lot of business and networking opportunities and exposure and experience throughout a variety of different activities, where we can bring people from all of these cities together in order to prepare students for the next career move, or to fill in particular gaps in terms of their backgrounds. Today, we're going to discuss the issue about getting the top to listen, and in an area called business cases. Now, some of you may be the people at the top, and you are on this webinar to find out what us others at the bottom are conniving and conspiring to do in order to get your attention. But what's really important here, and I think this was brought through very nicely in the introduction, we're not only talking about business cases to get the people inside our organizations to listen to some of our ideas, but as well, these are the types of tools and techniques that work very well when we're discussing issues with clients, when we're doing sales presentations and so on. You still need to have the business case, and a lot of it comes down to that business case. So the question that I get asked quite a bit is, why do we need to know about business cases? Well, if you think about decision makers or investors, the most important thing that they're looking for is confidence in the decisions that they're making. They are listening to some of the details if you get their attention. And it's a matter of getting their attention, but as well, when they make that final decision, they want to do it with some level of confidence. And of course, that also is important from the managerial side. Even when you're talking, we sometimes talk a lot about getting the people at the top, the very top, the senior in our organizations to listen. Sometimes we call that the C-suite. But sometimes it's a matter of, how do I get those people in the management area, the middle parts of our organizations, to listen to me? Let me start by, in this whole discussion, by framing things and saying the following. I believe the best ideas for our organizations, the best ways forward, lie inside our organizations. There are so many great ideas that are sitting inside our organizations that, for whatever reason, don't get listened to, don't get heard, or simply reside inside the employees themselves. We're doing a lot of research in this region right now on what's called employee voice and employee silence, and why people inside our organizations simply don't bring out the information and the great ideas that they have. But we're also talking about the development of these business cases and the reviews that come along with it. It has to be fit for the specific purpose. And in order to be fit for purpose, we have to be able to know what the people at the top or the people above us are looking for. What are the key things that they're looking for? And of course, engaging with those people. Let's be honest, even in our own personal and private lives, when we're looking to make a decision, we are more likely to listen to the people that we trust, that talk to us and our particular needs. So that level of engagement is absolutely critical. So when we start looking at projects and the way that projects come together, sometimes we call this the life cycle of a project. Those of you that have done things in the area of project management will be familiar with some of the things that you see on screen here. Starting from the definition of the project, to the setup, to the approval stages and the initialization or the initiation of the project, the overall execution, the delivery, and then the post-implementation review aspect that comes along with it. The business case sits at the project approval area. Once we get through that, then a whole new series of activities takes over, in the execution to the delivery through to the completion. One of the things that I talk to people in organizations about is, before getting to the business case, is to really start to understand, start to figure out some of the really, really critical things related to the project outline itself. You have to have an idea of the project outline. You have to be able to sketch it out, not from your perspective, but from the perspective of others inside the organization. What are they looking for? What are the key things that will attract their attention? One of the things that I do with a lot of my MBA students, and I'm curious to see, unfortunately we can't do this through a webinar type of activity, but if you in your organization had a choice to either make another 100 euros or save another 100 euros. So those are the only two choices you can make. You can either generate another 100 euros in sales or generate 100 euros in savings. Which one puts more on the company's bottom line? Which one puts more on the company's bottom line? Seminars, workshops, and I've done a lot of these. I would say about 70% of the people answering this say that generating another 100 euros of sales adds more to the bottom line than 100 euros of savings. And that is incorrect. When you generate another 100 euros of sales, you have the cost of goods that goes with it. You have taxes that have to be paid. If you're an incredible organization, if you are best in class, you will put maybe 20 euros on your bottom line. But if you save 100 euros, you could put anywhere between 80 and 100 euros on your bottom line. Now, I know some of you are sitting there, those of you who are in sales who are sitting there, others are just ready to scream at me at this point. You're saying, but if we only save money, we're going to go out of business. The bottom line is a lot of organizations are going out of business simply because they're making bad sales and not focusing in on the bottom line. So this here is the critical aspect of our business case. Are you going to generate money or are you going to save money? If and now this is where the marketing people are going to start shouting and screaming at me. If I invest 100,000 euros in a marketing campaign and I generate 500,000 in sales, that is when I break even just on the 100,000 that I spent on marketing. But if I take away 50,000 euros in marketing budget from a company and say that I don't spend it, I actually put 50,000 euros on my bottom line. These are the critical things that we have to start as our foundation when we start looking at business cases. Through your business case, are you going to save us money or are you going to generate money for us? That becomes the foundation. Some people say, you know what? The people at the top, all they do is listen to the numbers. They only look at the numbers. And the answer to that is, yeah, that's correct. But it's not the only thing. But it is a very, very critical thing. And we're going to talk about some of the other critical things that people at the top are looking at. So you have to be able to speak the language of the organization, the language of the business. Are you going to generate money or are you going to save money for me? Through this business case, through the business case itself, you have to show that you're generating money through either saving or making money. This is where the critical areas lie. These are the critical things that we have to talk about. So, as we go forward into looking at business cases, as we go forward trying to determine our business case, once we've got, now that we have that initial starting point, the initial starting point, now we have to look at the project size and scope, because there are big projects and there are little projects. When we start talking about little projects, you'll notice that there's always some level of an approval process. Smaller projects have a smaller approval process or an easier approval process. For example, if I go to my boss and I say, look, boss, I think that by us carpooling, we'll be able to be more efficient because when we come to work, we're tired. You're going to be able to get through to the next level much more quickly. But if I come with a big project and I say, boss, we need to go out and we need to buy 15 cars, and we are going to have to expense this, and we are going to have all of these different aspects that come along with it, insuring the cars and so on. Now the approval process, even though it's right at the beginning, then comes up with a series of other different hurdles for us. So what can we say from this? Smaller projects have fewer gates or gatekeepers that go along with it. This also requires the thinking process in terms of what is happening through the business itself and the business case that we put together. You want to have 10 million euros to invest in a new CRS system. There's going to be a lot more documentation, a lot more checkpoints, a lot more movement in order for it to happen. You want to do something more simple, it can be easier. Not that smaller projects don't get gates put in their way or ways that have to be looked at in order to get there. It's just the bigger the project, the higher the hurdles and the more gates that come along with them. So what we want to talk about here is the 5-case model. And these are the key things that any case needs to address. First and foremost, is there a compelling case for change? On your desks, beside you, 99% of you on this webinar have within arm's reach a phone, probably a smartphone. Is there a compelling case for you to change your cell phone from whatever model you have currently to the newest model? Would you like to have a new mobile phone? A lot of us would say, you know what, there is. But what's the compelling case for changing it? Is the new one going to be quicker, faster, more effective? Will I be able to do more things with it than with my current phone? Think about this from an organizational point of view. Is there a compelling reason for me as an organization to upgrade everybody's computers? What's the business case for it? What is the rationale for it logically, but as well from a numbers perspective? The options that you give me, the preferred option, does it optimize value for money? Meaning, am I, with my investment in your idea, your business case, could I get a better value if I put the money somewhere else? Now, I want to just take a quick parenthesis at this point. When you are putting a business case together to get some money to do something, to save money or make money or change the way you do things, you have to remember that there are other people also giving business cases to the people at the top. And you're not just fighting against the senior people. You're fighting against all of the other business cases that are out there. So you always have to look at the value for money. And if you think about the crisis situation in our region, that value for money discussion is one that is very, very tricky, and one that a lot of organizations are paying ultra attention to. Is the proposal viable? Is this actually something that we can do? Is the spend proposal affordable? Now, we put the affordable in quotation marks there. I've been involved in analyzing business cases for organizations, and people would say, you know what? We can't really afford it, but we can't afford not to. Well, you always have to remember that affordability comes with providing the business case. Do you have a proposal on the table that will either generate more money for me or save me money? If I invest $100,000, what is my return on investment? Is it affordable to me? Should we borrow money to be able to do this? Some business cases rely on us, or require us, to go out and borrow money from banks, from other parts of the organization in order to make something happen. And then finally, and this is an area that a lot of business cases don't focus in on effectively, what are the needs for implementation? Are these physical resources? Is it labor? Is it time? There are a lot of different needs that we have to look at when it comes to the implementation aspect of things. So let's look at the 5 key elements of good practice business cases. They revolve around these 5 elements. First of all, the strategic side. Is this a good strategic move for the organization? We've been doing some work these days with organizations that are involved in CSR projects. And if you look at some of these CSR projects, they're done for the good of society, but not necessarily from a financial point of view, again, making money or saving money, from an organizational side. But from a strategic standpoint, being a good corporate citizen, a lot of people say is simply good business, but the economics of it may not be there. So we have to be very cautious and cognizant of strategy in our business case. Does this fit into our organizational strategic objectives? Now you're going to say, but come on now. I am an individual who is a frontline supervisor at the bank. I have to know the strategic aspects of the organization in order to create a business case for something I want to do. The answer is yes, because the people at the top are always thinking about things from a strategic perspective. But they're also looking at it from the economic perspective of things. The supply and demand of labor, of money, of the overall economic environment, knowing what our competitors are doing, knowing what they are investing in, where they're saving money. I was reading an article today about British Telecom, and they were going to lay off almost 14,000 people, if my memory serves me correctly. Somewhere, somebody put together a business case and came up with the economic rationale, as well, of course, as a financial rationale, as to why these people needed to be laid off for the betterment of the long-term strategic goals of the company. Now, somebody else in the organization, in this case, and sorry, my highlighter's on the yellow at the moment. Think about this. Can I provide a commercial reason for laying off so many people? The answer is that's a hard sell. The commercial side might say, you know what? Now you're going to have issues when it comes to customer service, customer responsiveness, and so on. But the business case shows the strategic, the economic, and the financial aspects of it. The last aspect that I want to just focus in on here, key elements of good practice, is the management aspect of things. Is this a project that can be managed? Think about those of you who have an ERP system, an enterprise resource planning system. I can give you the strategic rationale, the economic, the financial, and the commercial, but it is one of the most difficult management implementations that anybody can imagine. You're looking at a process period of 3 to 5, maybe 3 to 7 years of management implementation for this. A lot of organizations that I've worked at said, you know what? It was the one thing we really didn't prepare for. So good practice business cases look at these 5 elements, and they go through and they try to understand each of these elements in order to produce the rationale for those people at the top. Sorry, I'm just having a little problem there.
Okay, and I will join with a short remark. I guess that all of you have a lot of questions already. In order to communicate with Mr. Samozi and ask your questions, please use the questions panel part of your tasks bar. You could type your questions, and he will answer them at the end of the webinar. We have provided a Q&A session. You could write your question anytime.
Great, thanks for that. You know, this is one of the differences, I guess, between webinar type presentations and live MBA or live classroom types of interactions where we can stop, we can discuss things and bring things forward. So I apologize. Unfortunately, I'm seeing what you're seeing, so I can't really see the questions at this point, but I promise we'll do our absolute best to answer any questions at the end of the presentation. So those are our 5 key elements of good practice when it comes to, or good practice business cases, as we say. So creating that compelling case for change, the strategic fit and the business needs. The preferred option has to optimize the value for money, as we've said. It's got to be commercially viable. It's got to be affordable from the financing perspective. And it's got to be achievable. It's got to be successfully delivered. And that's where that management aspect comes along as well. Let me also say at this point, I'll be more than happy to send out all of these presentation PowerPoints to you as well. And we'll arrange to be able to get those to you should anybody want them. This is where I'm going to take a slight detour and get into the costing aspects of things, the budgeting aspects of things. This is where a lot of people go blank in the face. The blood rushes away from their heads and moves into their feet. You cannot write a business case unless you play with the numbers. And here we look at costs. I want to try and break this down into simple language, clear language, as much as possible. All I can tell you is behind some of the things we're going to talk about here, when we talk about project costs, there's a lot of hard, fast numbers, okay? And we want to just try and create a framework that doesn't go heavy into the numbers, but we also have to recognize just how important they are. Let's start with what we call tangible costs versus intangible costs. So the tangible costs, and some people in the finance or accounting area, they will call these hard costs. These are costs that we can see, feel, and touch, and we can measure them relatively accurately or completely accurately. For example, the cost of a computer. Okay? I mentioned earlier, we want to put in a new ERP system. Okay? But our computers are older technology, and we have to upgrade those computers. Well, I can determine hard costs, exactly the purchase costs of those computers. How much power they use, the software that comes with them, the updates to that software, the wages that come along with it, all of the fixed, hard, tangible costs that come along with a particular project. But you also have to remember that we also have something called soft costs or soft benefits. These are things we cannot see, feel, and touch. For example, things that we cannot measure as accurately. And this is where I want to spend a little bit of time. Again, I've been involved in a lot of different business cases, and people will say, but any idiot knows that we're going to be more productive with faster computers. And I say, but how much more productive? Well, it's more productive. When I was working in industry, I was the only non-engineer in an engineering company. And I went into my engineering department one day and they said, you know what? We figured something out. And I said, what? They said, if we do X, Y, and Z, we'll be able to save 10 milliseconds per transaction. This is amazing, they said. And I said, I am so impressed. 10 milliseconds, excellent. And what will this mean for the customer? And they looked at me like I was an idiot. And they said, nothing. But we can do it 10 milliseconds quicker. How much is it going to cost me? I said. They said, probably about 30 to 40,000 Canadian dollars, about 20,000 euros. I said, so your business case that you're bringing to me is spend 20,000 euros in order to save 10 milliseconds per transaction, and the customer won't be able to understand that anything has changed. And they looked at me with big wide eyes and they said, yes. And I said, rejected. You've got to look at the intangible costs, the soft aspect, the productivity gains, sales gains, support software. You've got to be able to somehow measure these. Accountants love fixed costs, hard costs, because they know what they're getting. Soft costs, you have to convince me on. So you've got the tangible versus the intangible. Now we're going to go down a level, a little bit deeper. We're going to talk now about tangible displaced costs. Now, remember, tangible sides are these hard costs, tangible side. Tangible displaced. Displaced costs are costs that you pay now, but you won't have to pay because of the new project when it's in place. So these are costs that are displaced by the new system. This is what we call savings. For example, by upgrading our software, you won't need to have as many people inputting data because the system is going to be more effective and efficient. These are costs, that labor cost now goes away or gets shuffled to another part of the organization. You can accurately measure the costs. So, for example, Right now, you're renting a building, okay? Your organization's in a building, and you want to purchase your own premises. The rent that you're paying now is a displaced cost. It disappears when you buy the building. Now, you're going to say, so everybody should go out and buy a building. Not quite. There's some other things that we have to look at here. But displaced costs are an important part of creating that business case and creating that foundation within which senior people will listen to what's happening. So now we've got the tangible, avoidable costs. These are avoidable costs, and you're not paying now. But if you don't put a new project forward, you will have to pay them. So in general, these are costs you will need to pay in the future, but they're going to be avoided by the new system. Now, this is not as certain as the displaced costs that we just talked about, the tangible displaced costs. Accurate measurement. For example, your new delivery truck, okay? Your current truck, the current truck that you have, your current car that you have now at home will need to be repaired in the future. This potential repair cost is avoidable if you buy a new truck. Now again, I know you're going to have to spend a lot of money on a new truck, but you've also avoided paying the repairs on the current truck. Think about all of the different things inside our organization. Think about the things that we could avoid by doing something. And again, it comes back to what I was mentioning before. Business cases have to generate more money or save us money. Avoiding a cost is a savings that has to be looked at. Now, so we've done the tangible. Now let's look at the intangible, something called the displaced cost. Displaced costs are costs that you pay now, but are not easily measured. And the new system will displace those costs. It's also, unfortunately, hard to measure the benefits. For example, right now, in your organization, when somebody buys a new mobile phone, you need to go onto the system and physically register onto the system. And people are frustrated by this, okay? If I put in a voice registration system, it might displace that frustration and allow me to have repeat customers. But how much is it worth to me? I've had a number of experiences like this. Think about those of us who are going on to different websites to book hotels or to book airlines and so on, and how frustrated we get with certain websites because they're not user-friendly and so on. If there was a different system there, would it entice you to come back to it? And the answer is yeah. But how much is it going to cost an organization to do it? And what will the value that it brings to me? So these are what we call intangible displaced costs. Last little one that we have here is something called intangible avoidable costs. These are costs or benefits that you don't have now, but you will have if you go forward with a new project. So, excuse me, these are often very strategic in nature and involve a lot of uncertainty. For example, go back in time, there's a company called Sabre, which is still around today. And they were one of the first companies that went to an online travel registration system. Those of you in the travel industry, or if you go to a travel agent, chances are they're using what's called the Sabre system. They experienced, by developing this system, huge strategic benefits because it gave them a competitive advantage. It was impossible to measure those benefits accurately beforehand. Now, some people might say, you know what? Maybe they just got lucky. Well, some people say you create your own luck, but when you start looking at a business case and the strategic side of things, okay, by looking at things from those 5 different perspectives that we talked about, the strategic, the economic, the commercial, the financial, and the management side of things, and taking into account these different categories, tangible and intangible, avoidable and displaceable costs, positive things begin to emerge. We've had those 4 categories. Let me try and bring these together in a matrix for us. Okay? These are the 4 categories that we talked about: the displaced intangible, the avoidable tangible, and the displaced. What's important about what we see here is in relation to the level of certainty that we have and how measurable it is, how easily measurable it is. So, if you're building a business case and you are going to the finance department, and what you're talking about, whatever project you're talking about, has low measurability and low certainty, but you really believe in it, good luck. The finance people have don't get me wrong, I love finance people, but they can be some of the most difficult people to deal with. I deal with my own finance people. I say, don't you get it? Don't you understand just how good this is? And they say, the numbers just don't add up. But when you can talk from a perspective of highly measurable and highly certain, now you've got something on the table. So, in building these business cases, this cost justification summary, you have to try and position your business case and all of the different components into what's displaced and intangible, what is displaced and tangible, and be able to focus in on those things. Little secret here. Talking to people as a researcher, as an academic, as a consultant, I'm very, very fortunate to talk to people at the top levels of organizations. And what they tell me when they're looking at business cases, they say, you know what? What really impresses me is when people look at all aspects of the cost justification and they're willing to say, you know what? I really can't measure this, or it's difficult to measure, or there's a lot of uncertainty here, but let me still convince you. And then when they focus in on the highly certain, highly measurable, they give the facts and the figures that a person at the top needs. Again, there is no magic wand, but you've got to understand what the people at the top are looking for. So, in terms of these different aspects that we've just shown you, it's easiest to measure in quadrant 3. Let me just go back here. Quadrant 3, as we said, those are the easiest to measure. Those have to be measured. Okay, if you cannot, the project's dead. Don't even bother talking. Don't waste your time. Don't waste the person's time at the top of the organization. The biggest risk return is in quadrant 2. What we said before, low certainty, low measurability. This is where you're saying, please just trust me. Okay, well, trust in today's Crisis-oriented organizations, very, very difficult to work with. Trust is perhaps the one thing that we've lost. So look at the quadrants, look at the risk returns, look at the measurement aspects of it. So those are some key elements from the financial side of things. But let's also talk about something called the total cost of ownership. So it's nice to put all those things in place, but we also have to be able to talk a little bit of the language of the people at the top. So the cost, or the total cost of something, is the cost of buying, using, maintaining, and dumping something, getting rid of something afterwards. This will always be higher than the purchase price, the total cost of ownership. The cost of buying a computer is 500 euros, but you've got to maintain it. You've got to train people perhaps on how to use it. You have to have a support mechanism in place. You have to have access to the internet. And more organizations, when they're looking to get rid of computers, have to actually pay to get rid of them because of the environmental aspect of things. That's what we call the dumping aspect. So when you're putting a business case together, you have to look at the total cost. And again, when you go to somebody at the top and say, here's the total cost of ownership, here's how I've calculated it, they will be impressed by this. Again, now we're on the soft side of the business case. Okay, a business case is not simply a static document that somebody reads and says yes or no to. It's also about the convincing aspect. And when you're showing these things and you say, look, I'm not just looking at the cost of this, but the whole cost of it, now they're paying attention. This total cost of ownership captures costs, not benefits. Okay? There's no benefits here. It's simply the costs. Good practice here is to build different scenarios: best case, worst case, expected case. When people are putting together business plans, okay? I've had one of the things that I did back in Canada is I was working for an organization that was investing in small and medium enterprises, and they would come with their business cases. Sorry, their business plans, which is basically a business case. And we were looking at the total costs of setting up businesses, not yet looking at the benefits that come from it. Another aspect, and a lot of you will be familiar with return on investment, which is the gain from the project divided by the cost of the project. Finance people, and if I probably got some finance people here with me right now, they love to hate me. They compare returns on investments. Remember how I said different people come to us with business cases, and I look at the business case and I say, what's the return on investment if I spend 5,000 euros on new computers for my people or 5,000 euros on a delivery truck? The comparisons are easy. I simply look at the return on investment. It's a percentage, the gain versus the cost. But it's hard to determine the benefits because they are so different. You got to be sure that all projects calculate cost the same way. Total cost of ownership or just purchase cost. You also have to consider when you will get the money back. There's something called future cash flows. We would rather have a euro today than a euro 2 years from now. It's the same thing with the saving money versus the gaining money. I would rather save 10 euros right now than I would get 10 euros from sales a year from now. Think about, again, the crisis situation and the businesses that you're doing and the collection of money. One of the big problems that businesses, especially SMEs, are facing right now is collecting debts that are owed to them. The longer that goes out, the longer the payment terms, the less value that money has to that SME. That's what we call discounted cash flows. And finally, what we call the cost-benefit analysis, showing all the costs, the tangible, the intangible, the benefits. Best to use a discounted cash flow. If I can save my money today instead of spending it tomorrow, do I spend it now? Do I save the money now? Do I earn the money now? And so on. This is overall, all of these things are what we call a cost-benefit analysis. Now let's get into a little bit of the softer side of things. And I hate to say this, but most managers are poor listeners. Sorry about that, okay? Think about the people at the senior level, okay? They've got a lot of things on their mind. They've got a lot of people vying for their attention. They can only focus on so many things, okay? But I'll tell you this, they are amazing listeners on the bottom line. They look at KPIs, key performance indicators. They want the hard and fast numbers. But you and I, down inside our organizations, know that they don't tell the whole story. But unfortunately, it's a story that they're reading. It's a story that they're looking. They do listen to the bottom line. You have to be able to show bottom line, saving money, making money. Here's what happens on the bottom line. So when we're trying to convince these people, it's about arguments of facts, of faith, and fear. Everything that I've talked about earlier, we are trying to work towards facts. That quadrant that we talked about with high levels of uncertainty and highly measurable, these are arguments of facts. And if you can't convince me on the facts, nothing's going to happen. But you can also give me the arguments of fear. If we don't do this, we are going to lose 20% of our sales. If we don't follow what this other company is doing, we're going to lose customers. You also have, though, this argument of faith. Arguments of faith that go along with it. Trust me, this is going to assist us. This will provide us with something. For example, fear. Think about our own companies right now. If you think about, unfortunately, what companies are doing to convince us about things, a lot of it is based on fear. These are the bad things that are going to happen if we don't do this. Where's the faith? Faith, unfortunately, is predicated on trust. You gave me the facts, okay? Thank you very much. You scared the crap out of me. But I don't trust you. Why? Because in the past, despite the facts, despite the fear, things didn't work out the way they happened. We have to be able to target individuals at the top. Individuals that we're trying to convince. We have to hit the different receptacles in the brain. You got to hit the logic. You've got to play with emotions. It's a balance between the intellectual side and the emotional side of the discussion. I want to give you a quick example that I use in a lot of my MBA courses. A number of years ago, British Airways was trying to save money. They were basically bleeding money, okay? And Willie Walsh, the head of British Airways, went to the stewards and stewardesses on the airplanes and said, guys, we got to save money, okay? Go away, come back with some ideas on how we can save money. The stewards and the stewardesses went away. They came back to Willie Walsh and they said, "Sir, we have our first idea." And Willie Walsh, being a very money-hungry CEO, rubbed his hands and said, "What have you got for me?" And they said, "Well, sir, we believe one of the best ways to save money," again, we're not generating money here, we're saving money. It goes right to the bottom line. They said, "Sir, we suggest that you take one olive off of every appetizer plate in the first class cabin." And Willie Walsh was silent. He said, "What are you talking about?" They said, "Well, sir, every time we go out with the appetizer plate in the first class cabin, it has 2, 3, or 4 olives on it. And when we take it back from the customer, it has 1, 2, or 3 olives on it. And we simply throw those away. So if you take 1 olive off of every appetizer plate in the first class cabin, the customer won't know anything has changed, and you can put that money in your pocket." Willie Walsh crunched the numbers. Annual savings, British Airways, by taking 1 olive off of every appetizer plate in the first class cabin, approached £70,000. Now, this would not save an airline. £70,000 on a 1 or 2 billion euro airline, pound airline, doesn't make any difference. But what Willie Walsh said to them was, "You've just saved 2 jobs." One of the things that we need to do is we need to start understanding facts and creating the faith that comes from those, to know what are the outcomes of it, to create those levels of trust and so on. As we go forward, there are risks to our organization. These are those soft side aspects that we were talking about. These things that are not necessarily easy to measure. The business operations and the continuity, the reputation of the organization. Marketers, I love you, okay? I was a marketer, okay? I worked in marketing. I was a marketing manager. Many, many times I would say to the people in the organization that this is going to be bad for our reputation. How do you measure that? How can you quantify that? Now, don't get me wrong. Reputations are absolutely critical. We talk about brand name reputation. We know a lot of brands that have been beaten up simply because things weren't done properly and the reputation of the organization went down and it hit the bottom line. These are risks, but how do you quantify them? How can you say to me, by not being a part of a particular event, the reputation of our organization will go down? These, I can only take you on faith or fear. There are no facts associated with that unless you can create the facts. How about branding and marketplace consistency? How about our financial solvency or our compliance with legal and regulatory obligations? All of these different things are risks. Some organizations take the risk, Volkswagen, when it comes to diesel emissions. We're not going to comply. The business case says you got to comply. They decided not to. What comes out the other side? Reputation of the organization destroyed. Branding in the marketplace next to impossible to achieve. Financial results getting kicked hard. These are the different risks to the organization. And these are the risks associated with inaction when it comes to a business case. Let's review, just to put everything in a box. We're coming towards the bottom end of our discussions together. Business cases are an essential part of project selecting and scoping. People at the top want to have the business case. They need to have the business case. It needs to talk to them. It needs to talk to them. Again, strategically, economically, commercially, financially, and management-wise. You got to have the 4 blocks in place. It requires making assumptions explicit. You have to find a way of creating assumptions that are explicit, that we can look at, that we can try and quantify in some way, shape, or form. It's important to try and create those wherever we can. We've got to use arguments of facts, of faith, and fear. Yes, it is okay to say, doing this could mean the end of the organization. Oh, you got my attention. Now give me the facts. Now give me as many facts as possible. You got to set the direction and the support for projects. It's not just about having the business case in the project, but it's the overall support that comes along with it that's just as critical. Somebody's got to take ownership. Interesting. When I talk to people inside organizations and I say, why don't you put a business case? Because this looks like a really important project. And you've got the facts, you've got everything there. And they say, I don't want to be the owner of it, because I know whoever comes up with the idea gets to implement. The idea has to be there, but I don't want to have to take ownership of it. You got to set some boundaries. Okay, you got to set some boundaries that come along with these business cases. What's probable and possible through these. You've got to look at your relationship asset. We call this human capital. Okay, you can have all the facts in place, as we said, but you got to have the human capital. People have to believe you. Okay, maybe sometimes for a good business case, you bring along the people with the human capital to get it done as well, because it's not just the numbers that talk. Here's my ultimate takeaway, and I said this right at the beginning, and I want to close with this. The best ideas in every organization lie inside the company. Our best ideas. Now, if some of you are consultants, I'm a consultant as well. Sorry, we can come up with ideas, and yes, we have some great ideas for companies, and companies come to us and they spend and give us a silly amount of money to come up with ideas, but the best ideas lie inside our companies. The idea of taking one olive off of every appetizer plate and saving 70,000 pounds could never have been brought up by a consultant. Could never have been brought up by CEOs and senior executives sitting around a table trying to come up with ideas. Never come up. Let me just finish off British Airways for a second. British Airways, their biggest business case failure had to do with bringing paid food onto airlines. They simply went out and they rolled it out. And they said overnight, they went from free food to no food. Why? Ryanair does it. Our competitors are doing it. We'll do it. One of the biggest failures. They took a huge hit on reputation. They had commercial failure on their hands. And people were still paying the same amount for a British Airways flight. Bad business case. I'm sure the facts were there. They've redone it, they've retooled it, and they've brought it out again, much more successfully. The top needs to listen, the bottom needs to make the case. I will always, and I will go to the ends of the earth to scream, listen to the people inside your company, but as well, give them the tools to create the cases that you at the top, those at the top will listen to. Thank you very much for listening to me, for putting up perhaps with some of my rants, okay? But you know, these are the things that we do in MBA programs. We try to provoke a little bit, but at the end of the day, we got to have our organization stronger and more effective. Thank you very much. And I think at this point, what I'll do is I'll turn it over to Darina for a little bit of moderation of some questions for us. And I'm going to grab a glass of water from my desk here as well.
Yeah, you definitely deserved at least a glass of water. Thank you, Dr. Samozi, for the interesting presentation and for the deep insights. Thank you for presenting the business case in a mode that made us listen. Actually, one of the takeaways for me is that managers actually, yes, they listen to facts, and this is a fact, and they listen to highly measurable, highly certain facts and figures. But at the same time, it is not only facts, but also emotions that matter, and they could be either positive or negative. They could be the fear that something could go wrong. So managers listen what I'm going to share with you, but at the same time they could be a positive emotion, like, okay, if we implement this and this idea, we could save jobs, for example. We have a couple of questions, and I will read out loud them so that, yeah, we could answer. Okay, there is an interesting question by Zlatina Mikhailova. She's interested. Could you tell us from your experience what is a good indicator for the benefit of a project on working on the organizational culture? It is very hard to give a hard indicator, and it is hard to convince with an argument, different than it is a strategic initiative. So,
that's an excellent question. One of the areas that I work in a lot, as I had mentioned before, is the area of organizational change, and in particular resistance to change. And quite honestly, one of the most difficult business cases to make is in the area of organizational culture. Organizational culture, from the time that you decide that you want to change the culture, takes approximately 7 years, 5 to 7 years, if you ever get there. Lots and lots of examples of organizations that have gone through an organizational change process and never reached the end point. One of the best ways that I found in order to create business cases for shifting organizational cultures comes a lot from benchmarking data. Organizations, so going out and creating the business case based on other companies that have changed their culture and the results that come from it. Now, the problem here is that you're dealing with a lot of intangibles. Okay, culture is not something that we can easily touch and feel, but we can touch and feel the cultures in other organizations. So a lot of this comes from benchmarking data, but as well from what we would call survey or focus group data, to try and use those to begin building the business case. But quite honestly, Zlatina, it is a very, very tough sell. A lot of organizational cultural change starts from people actually at the top saying that we need to change the culture, not necessarily understanding what's going on inside the organization. So my advice, if you're trying to build a business case around changing the culture, is to benchmark outside the organization or even inside the organization. If you're fortunate enough to have multiple locations or a lot of different departments, and there's certain departments where the culture is drastically different, but it's more effective, to use that type of data to help support the business case. But unfortunately, a lot of cultural change business cases are based on faith and fear and not so much on facts.
Okay, talking about emotions, about faith and fear, actually, how could we control them and not to become too emotional in a business case, actually, while speaking about business?
That's a very interesting question. You know, I've got a lot of people who are finance people, friends who are finance people, colleagues who are finance people, and they say, you know what? I try to avoid the emotional side of things and simply breathe in the numbers and let the numbers do the dance for me. But they can't do it. The numbers talk the story, okay? But you cannot separate the emotional side out of this. I'll never say that it is 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, faith, fear, numbers, okay? It will never, ever be that. You have to be able to understand what pulls the heartstrings. If you've got a person at the top who's literally non-emotional, let me take the perfect non-emotional person. And all they do is look at the numbers. And believe me, I deal with CEOs, I consult with CEOs who say, but the numbers just don't add up. They just don't add up. I cannot, in all good faith, do it if the numbers don't add up. That's where you have to start saying, well, what are the things that will trigger this person to take just a step back, just to open the door a little bit in order to bring the numbers through? You know, if business cases were pure numbers and only on logical thinking, like, who's the person in Star Trek? Spock, okay? Spock only dealt with rationality. Non-rational, I don't do it. Luckily, people inside our organizations today aren't Spocks, okay? They aren't Spock from Star Trek. There's always that little door in there. They might be heartless creatures, okay? Don't get me wrong, okay? There are decisions that they make, and I say, how could you possibly do that, okay? But they do stay awake at night because of the emotional sides. So you've got to be able to really understand who that individual is. Talk to their facts, talk to their faith, talk to their fears.
Okay, so because at the end of the day, we are humans and facts are as important as emotions.
100%, 100%.
Okay, you have a lot of thank yous actually so far. You could use the questions panel. Yeah, you could use the questions panel to ask some questions. Yeah, and to use the time for an interactive communication with Mr. Samози. Well, you have a couple of minutes to type some of your other questions. Maybe we might have provoked in the meanwhile. I would ask Mr. Samози just to share us what are actually the most common questions, the most common fears managers face when they have to communicate with senior managers. I guess that you have some cases and some typical questions. Maybe this is the time to tackle them too.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm in a very, very fortunate position working for a university because I get to speak to people at the very tops of organizations to the lower parts of organizations. And for me, when I talk about the lower parts of the organizations, for me, that's the most important, okay? Those at the top are nothing without the bottom, okay? And quite honestly, the people at the bottom can still be something without the people at the top. So when I talk about lower parts of organizations, I mean, I do it with total respect. The biggest fear that I hear from people at the lower parts of organizations is the fear of rejection in putting themselves out there and bringing up an idea. And I talk to them, when you talk to them about this, they say, well, why are you fearful of your organizations? What is it that you don't want? I don't want to expose myself, okay? I don't want to expose myself to people at the top and have them say, boy, that was one of the stupidest ideas I've ever heard, okay? And so they hold on to their ideas. This is when we were talking a little bit in the beginning of our seminar about employee voice versus employee silence, okay? There are fears that come from voicing, and there are fears that come from being silent, okay? We have to, and this is one of the things that I've now begun working with a couple of organizations on, in helping people lower level, in lower parts of organizations, to develop business cases, to actually go through some of the things that we talked about here and make it not so scary. At the same time, working with the people at the top to say, look, these ideas coming up are not from consultants. These are people inside your organizations. Let's work with feedback in order to help them develop the business case. We're not committing ourselves to choosing a way forward, but we're doing something called, which is a new term in business, feeding forward. Okay, we always talk about feedback, but now there's this new area that we're working with called feeding forward, to help people with the development of these business cases to feed forward to better business cases. And here's the, again, let's talk about bottom lines for this. The bottom line is, you will never get better ideas in your companies from those that are in the companies themselves, okay? You will never get better ideas. Let's go out and try and bring those ideas forward. Let's have them develop them in such a way that the people at the top are understanding it, they're getting the information that they need, and so on, to come along with it. So this is what I get from a lot of people. I don't want to expose myself. Well, you know what? It's time that we start working with people whose ideas are fantastic, simply to get those ideas out there, because right now our organizations, and it goes right back to what we said at the very beginning, they're not saving money that they could be saving, and they're not generating money that they could be generating, simply because we're not getting the information up to the decision makers.
Okay, thank you for the valuable input and clarification and additional comments. I'm sure that we have a lot of questions, but as we are approaching the end of the webinar session, I would definitely encourage you to ask your questions directly to Mr. Samozi. You are able to see his email at the last slide of his presentation. You could also send your questions to our media email, capital.bg. We could also forward the questions to him. Thank you all for your active participation today. We hope that you managed to get the answers you needed, and we also hope to see you as applicants to the contest Next Generation, and also as future students at the University of Sheffield International Faculty, City College. Again, all details regarding the contest Next Generation could be found at capital.bg/next. Remember that the deadline for applications and nominations is the 27th of May. You will also receive a recording of today's webinar to your email within the next couple of days. Yes, let's keep in contact. It was nice spending the last hour with you. See you soon.
Thank you very much as well on behalf of myself and from the University of Sheffield International Faculty. And best of luck. You've got my email address. Let's not let this be a one-off. I'm more than happy to give some advice or suggestions as required for anybody. So best of luck. And again, thank you very much for participating. And thank you very much to Capital and Carriere for organizing things. Thank you very much, guys.